So, in Genesis 3, it says, "The serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree in the garden?" Now I want to stop right there at that verse, focusing on the serpent. He was more crafty than any of the beasts of the field. So I did a little study on the word crafty, subtle, and the serpent. This was Garden of Eden, right? This was Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden was how good in God's sight? Very good, perfect. Okay, so God created the serpent, and He created the serpent crafty, subtle. In the Hebrew, it's positive, intelligent, very, very resourceful, very intelligent. It's a positive craftiness. I looked at this when I saw it, and I was projecting my own thoughts on the serpent. Serpents are evil. I was projecting an evil, so I thought subtlety. When we speak in subtle terms, oftentimes it's divisive or not good. But I read this and I started thinking, this was Garden of Eden. There was nothing bad about Garden of Eden. Yes, the devil is bad. Yes, the devil is subtle as the way we use it today, but the serpent was not. The serpent was perfect, just like everything else in the garden was perfect. And so the other day I was listening to NPR, and I heard a very interesting story that kind of it really does go along with this idea of subtlety in the animal kingdom. There was the Omaha Zoo back in about 1971-ish, something like that. There was this orangutan whose name was Fu Manchu. And he was the oldest orangutan of a group of 5. And the leader or the foreman of the zoo staff was also very well acquainted with this orangutan, Fu Manchu. He was kind of a orangutan trainer, and so he had a relationship with Fu Manchu, very close relationship. And one day, somebody from the grounds came running in, Sir, the orangutans are not in their area. They are now up in the trees over by the elephant cage." And so, okay, somebody's got to close the door because they're not supposed to be out. This is not good. This is a security hazard. Orangutans are huge and strong and fast. And okay, so he goes up, he climbs up into the tree, he gets Fu Manchu, leads him back, and all the other ones follow. And he says, "Okay, guys, you got to close the gates. You got to lock the gates. These are orangutans. They're not stupid. You've got to close them. You've got to lock them, because if you don't, they're going to get out again." Yes, sir. We're gonna lock the doors. We always lock the doors. I don't know what happened this time, but we're gonna lock the doors. So they lock the doors. Orangutans are there, and the next week, somebody comes running. "Sir, they're out again. They're up over there in the elephant trees, not in their habitat. What gives? Okay, guys, who did it? Who left the door open?" No, sir, really, we locked the door. The doors were locked. We double-checked. Okay, triple-check next time. Don't let it happen. He leads the orangutans back to their cage, locks the doors, and the third week, they're up there again, not in their cage. He says, how did they do that? Somebody has left the door open. No, sir, I actually saw them the other day. I saw Fu Manchu doing something with the door. I saw him doing something with the door, and I don't know what he was, but he got out, and everybody followed before I got there, because I was over here, and they were way over there. Okay, well, what we got to do now is clean up the grounds. Every night before anybody goes home, we got to clean up the grounds, make sure there's no rocks, no sticks, no tools of any kind that these animals can use to escape from the enclosure. They've got to be using tools, using something that they find on the grounds. Okay, so they clean up the grounds, they clean it up, and it goes well for about 2 weeks. And okay, finally we've got this under control. The next week, hey sir, we didn't do this. We cleaned up the grounds, we locked the doors, but they're out again. And so he's like, yeah, right. There was something on the grounds. No, sir, it was clean. It was spotless. Somebody left the door open. Sir, we checked it 3 times, 4 times. There's no way that they would have gotten out. He says, yeah, but they're out. Well, so he climbs back up in the tree. And as he's leading Fu Manchu back, he looks at the monkey, and the monkey kind of smiles. And he sees a glint of something bright, like a filling. Monkeys don't have fillings, apes don't have fillings, orangutans don't have fillings, but he sees it, so he pulls back the lip, and he pulls out a wire about so long, a copper wire, shiny copper wire. It's been there for a while. What Fu Manchu was doing is he was using that copper wire, threading it through, back, and pulling it like a credit card trick. You know, you put the credit card in, it opens the door, and you can slide in. Well, he was threading the wire through, pulling it, and opening the door. That's kind of crafty. He hid it from the zookeepers for at least 5 weeks. That's really crafty, and that's today. That's in this last century, but that's within the last 50 years or so. Can you imagine how crafty the serpent was without Satan using it? I mean, that's some real craft. To be able to use the monkey, to be able to use a wire, to hide the wire in his teeth, nonetheless, so nobody could find it until the fatal mistake of pride comes in. Kind of personifying the animals, I guess, a little bit. So the serpent was more crafty than any of the beasts that God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said that you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? Another way to understand that is, did God say there's no tree? Did God say that there's no tree that you can eat of? Or what tree can you eat? What tree can you not eat of the garden? Okay? It's kind of confusing, because I had to go over like 3 or 4 or 5 times, and obviously I still don't know how to explain it. But the Hebrew allows for 2 different interpretations. Hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden, or of any tree of the garden? Okay? Every tree, meaning, is there a tree that God doesn't want you to eat of? Or any tree, which means, did God say you can't eat anything in the garden? Okay? And so when Eve answers, she answers the latter interpretation. The woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit in the middle of the garden, the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. Okay? So, Satan was being very crafty. He was using the God-given abilities of the snake to be very crafty. Now, what I want to know is why or how. Kind of think about it. What attracted Eve to the tree? Why was she by the tree? What attracted her to the tree? Now, was the tree any different from any other tree? Okay, curiosity. How different was the tree in the midst of the garden and of knowledge of good and evil? How different was that from any other tree? It was in the garden, correct? Everything in the garden was very good, correct? So there was no difference. There was no reason that she had to be beside this tree. There was no reason that she was attracted to this tree as opposed to any other tree. Okay? There was the fruit. Was it more beautiful, more attractive than any other tree in the garden? Every tree, everything in the garden was very good, so there was no reason for her to desire or to look at or to question the difference between the trees. You know, because I used to think that, well, maybe it was just a little bit less becoming, less beautiful because it was the tree, it was the cursed tree, you know. But if it was that, our human nature is curiosity. I wonder why that tree is so not as good as the other trees. I wonder why it doesn't look as good. So that itself would attract some attention. But it couldn't have been because everything in the garden was very good. Okay? So she is walking by herself. Okay, it says here in verse 6, she took the fruit and gave to her husband also with her, and he did eat. It says her husband with her, gave her husband with her. But in other places in the Bible, in Timothy, 1 Timothy, it says that Eve was the one deceived, not Adam. Therefore, Eve sinned. Also, it says about the same thing in 2 Corinthians 11:3. The woman was deceived. I had somebody ask me, well, hasn't your wife ever done something that you did not approve of? I'm like, yeah, but not while she's with me. She doesn't, we don't try to make each other angry. We don't try, oh, you're with me, so I'm going to do this because I know you don't like it. We're not going to do that. And I really doubt that a sinless pair would have done that. So we can gain from elsewhere in the Bible, Timothy and Corinthians, that they were separated. She is walking by herself, and kind of reverse psychology, kind of questioning, because Satan used this any kind of, his phraseology could have been translated either way. And so Eve had a question. Well, no. She took it the worst way, perhaps just simply for the idea of, well, I'm going to make this serpent understand what's right, because this is God. This is not a malevolent being. This is God. He says we can eat anything in the garden, not just one tree. We can eat anything. And the serpent said to her, no, you won't die. You won't die. Maybe he's also saying, well, look at me. I'm eating the fruit, and I'm not dead. Hey, look at me. I'm a serpent, and yet I'm talking to you, and I've eaten from this fruit. You're not going to die. Your eyes will be open when you eat this fruit. And you will be as gods, knowing good and evil. You will be as gods, knowing good and evil. Now, verse 5. I want you to look at verse 5. At the beginning, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be open. And the last line there, you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Both of those words in the Hebrew are translated from Elohim. Elohim is God in Hebrew. So why would it be translated God in the first part and gods in the second part? Does anybody know? Yes. Yes, we've got a Hebrew scholar. Thank you. Elohim is plural. It's a plural noun. God is plural in Hebrew. And so the King James interpreters, translators, there's only one God. Eve cannot be God because there's only one, so they translate it as gods. However, if you think back to what did Satan desire? What was Satan's desire? Satan's desire was to be better than God. I will ascend above the Most High. Satan says, I want to be better than God. I want to be God myself with everybody lower than me. Satan says, I want to be God. So he wouldn't say to Eve, you will be gods. Eve knew there was only one God. He himself knew there was only one God. So he wouldn't have tempted her. He wouldn't have tempted her saying, you're going to be as gods. Because there is no other gods. That's a foreign term. If you're accustomed to only worshiping one God. So Satan says, you will be as God. It's another way of interpreting it. You will be as God, knowing good and evil. Now, we got to be careful. It says, the serpent was more crafty than any beast which God had made. Was this a crafty statement? Was it a false statement? Well, God knows that in the days you eat thereof, your eyes will be open. Yeah, their eyes were open. You will be as God. Were they as God? No. Were they as God, knowing good and evil? Were they like God in that they knew good and evil? In that respect, Satan did not lie. He had this caveat. You're going to be like God, ... because you're going to know good and evil. You're not going to be like God in that you're omnipotent. You're going to be like God in that you know good and evil. Well, just like Eve took the other meaning for verse 1, she took another meaning for this as well. Satan's craftiness put some doubt in her mind, put some questions in her mind. He caught her off guard with the question, did God say you really can't eat of anything in the garden? And so she stayed and talked. She stayed and talked. The opening song, Anywhere with Jesus I Can Safely Go. When we have Jesus, we can safely go. We don't have to worry about being deceived. But when we go outside of what God's recommendations, our closing songs, peace, peace, perfect peace, our perfect peace is missing when we go outside of God's bounds. We're not going to have the perfect peace that comes with being and walking with God. We're going to be deceived, easily deceived. Like, For example, in my own life, there was one time when I was faced with an option of an investment that sounded really good. The advertisers really sold it great, and I was like, okay. So I invested some money and made an investment, and then I didn't have any peace. I was like, well, should I do this? Should I not? Okay, it's kind of I'm really nervous, and I don't have any peace right now, but I rationalized. I was like, well, that's just because it's a risky business, but everybody says it's going to be okay, so I'm just going to go along with it. And I never found peace until I withdrew and canceled the investment. I never had peace. Even though I was slowly gaining, I never had peace. I didn't lose anything, but I never had peace while the investment was there, because it's not trusting in what God has, how God has led. Now the woman, when she saw that the tree was good, it was pleasant, and it was one desired to make one wise, that's when she took it. She didn't take it because it looked worse. She didn't take it because it wasn't any good. She took it because it was good for food, and it was pleasant to the eye. It did look good, and it was desired to make her wise. That's why she took it, not because it looked bad. My title is Not All That Glitters Is Gold. This was good. It was good. The tree was good. The investment was good, but it wasn't how God had directed. The tree wasn't any worse than any other tree, but it wasn't what God directed. God's direction was, don't eat the tree. Because when you eat it, you're going to know good and evil. That's what God meant as well. You're going to know good and evil because you're going to know what it means to disobey. But Satan kind of twisted it, and he made it be like, oh, you're going to be like God because you're going to know good and evil. He didn't really lie to her in that sentence because of that caveat. You're going to know good and evil. But because Eve had a God-given desire to desire more wisdom, more intelligence, he played on that. We need to be really, really aware and careful when there is something that may look good. Just because it looks good doesn't mean that it's going to bring good. Let's turn in our hymnals to 463. Peace, perfect peace, 463. Jesus will.